Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today for my AMAP Friday. I've not done it the last two because I've been I was out of the country 1 week and I was teaching in Rhinebeck last week. So doing teacher training wasn't able to make it. So, not sure everybody's name. I just see the different people joining. So I'm glad you're joining. And today I'm talking about somebody asked me a question: is how does Pilates start? Like, where does it start? And they asked if it was in the feet, because when we do reformer, we start with footwork. But the reality is it doesn't really start with footwork, right? Because what do you have to do first, right? The first thing you have to do is sit down on the apparatus. So it starts in the sitting process. And we know that Joe taught the way he wanted you to sit on his reformer, right? You sit up close to the bar, and you sit down onto the carriage. And when you do that and you lie back, your head fits right in between the shoulder blocks, so you don't have to adjust. So that's really where it starts. But even then, before you put your feet on the bar, what do you have to do, right? You have to organize yourself, and you have to have powerhouse control to what lifts your legs, right? Your legs don't lift by themselves. The legs have to lift from where they're attached, and where they're attached is to the lower powerhouse. So you control the lower powerhouse to put the feet up on the bar, right? So before you even start to push out in your closed chain, you don't have a process before that, right? The process as far as footwork, you have to do all these other things first before you get ready to do footwork. And, one of the things to always remember is that you have to see in your brain the movement that you want to do. That's something that is often not always recognized, and it's something that you need to pay attention to, because that's part of what our job is, to change that vision, right? It's a vision that everybody has of the movement. And people have habituated patterns and stuck patterns. And so when they think they're doing what you're asking, but they're really not, and it's not clarified. So that's why verbal, tactile, and visual are important, and you have to figure out what kind of learner they are and deal with that in relationship to the kind of learner they are, ideally to give them the best feedback in relationship to their best learning process. Everybody's on the spectrum in different ways. And so, as teachers, that's one of the things we do, or your teacher should be doing that for you. If you're watching this and you're not a teacher and you're just a student, that's part of what has to happen, right? A really good teacher understands that and takes the time to figure that out, and doesn't teach their way, they teach your way and your needs, because that's sort of how it all comes together as far as learning goes. The best learning environment, let's put it that way, okay? So it really doesn't start with the feet. And even when you look at the process of footwork, it's a closed chain, and the foot are accommodative, right? That's why we have 26 bones, right? Because the foot's very accommodatable, because a flat surface is not normal, right? That's been a environmentally induced relationship to what our foot hits all the time, and most of the time, especially in city. But even the city, it's not always flat. There's bumps and this and that and different things, and it's not always even. But compared to walking out in the forest or in the meadows and things like that, that our bodies were evolved from in hundreds of thousands to millions of years, that's a process that we had to have a lot of adaptability in the feet, because the floor surfaces were so uneven all the time. So that's, what we have now today is something different. We wear shoes and we do all these other things. And, it's interesting because in the beginning, Joe wore shoes. So we've thought about it. Elaine, you and I, we've talked about this and trying to figure out, well, did he wear shoes in the beginning because that's what everybody else did and then he changed? Or did he wear shoes because it was, what people did in real life, so he wanted to mirror that? But we know fairly that by the 30s that changed, and he started to be barefoot. And then he started with a little pad on his bar. And then he took that bar off, and he would add a pad when you needed it. All right? So footwork has a number of different things that you have to be aware of. As people get older, they lose their fat pads, so it could be more tender, so you have to add more padding. But if you want to grow the fat pad, you have to stress the system. So if you don't stress the foot and always pad it, then it won't really get more of a fat pad. So you have to find, again, it's always finding that balance in a way to do things where you put enough stress in the system to allow for the system to change in relationship to that stress and grow. That's part of the process, whether it's the muscle, whether it's the gristle, the connective tissues, the fat, all those different things the body has and does that, different things for reasons. And that's why we have fat pads in different places of our body, because those are places that tend to over a long period of time. You kneeled, you stood, where did you need fat pads? Where did you need some extra cushion? So there's part of that. Okay. So we have to look at those things as well. But when we look at footwork itself, where does it start? Right? It doesn't start in the feet. It starts in the powerhouse, because you have to organize yourself. You have to, get that powerhouse to work and stabilize it. Stability before mobility. So you stabilize, then you have something to use the legs against in relationship to the stability mobility balance within the body in gravity and open and closed chains. So those are the things that we need to think about. So it really starts that in the powerhouse, the upper, right? The lower powerhouse, because where do you start? You don't just start pointing your feet, right? The work happens where? The work always happens in the legs, right? The hips and the knees and the ankle, okay? But it starts from inside out, doesn't go from outside in, even though the chain is closed. And, when you think about it developmentally, babies don't start walking, right? Unless you're a horse. Within a couple hours, a horse is up and walking. Babies take somewhere between 9 months and a year and a half, depending on where they are on the spectrum and the bell curve of that integration of developmental. So if that's the case, then we don't start with the feet. We start with what? The powerhouse. The lower powerhouse and the upper powerhouse, because you need stability before mobility. So before we start so what do babies do? They flail their arms and their legs around, and that's building, that's strength where it's needed. And then eventually, as they get stronger and more stable, then they can start to sit, to kneel, to pike, to stand. And what do we do in Pilates? We lie on our backs, we lie on our sides, we lie on our stomachs, we kneel, we sit, we pike, we stand. So that's the progression, right? That's and I've been teaching this for 20 years now. That Pilates, what did he do? He followed the developmental process. It's hardwired in everybody. We all do it, and he followed that. That's part of his genius, and why he was 50 years ahead of his time. Because the science and the nomenclature and the understanding of that was put out there in the 50s by physical therapists, they weren't, I don't know if they were exposed to Joe, but they trying to do the same thing that Joe did. Instead of trying to do a muscle or muscle group, they started to look at, well, how do we first learn how to move? Well, Joe did that 50 years before they did. He claims that he started his floor work, mat work, in 1902, and it was in the 50s that Bobath and her husband, started to do the whole developmental sequence process and integrate that into physical therapy and that type of thing. So almost 50 years later. And then, he continues to be 50 years ahead of his time for a lot of things. So that's, I guess that's enough. A little bit about where does it start from? And it really starts, it's always has to go in, you have to see the movement first before you do it. That's how the kind of brain works. It has a understanding of what you're trying to do, And that is something that it doesn't start in the muscle. It starts in the brain, always does. And Joe talked about that quite often, how it's the nervous system that controls the muscles, which controls the movement. So thus, that's contrology. Contrology is understanding how to control your mind, your will, and make changes, and that's returning to life. Because what happens in our society, because of sitting, a lot of sitting and injuries, both physical, mental, psychological, the psychological issues, work environments, all those things where we habituate into patterns, because the brain is very pattern generated and habituation generated. It likes that. It makes it easier for it to do. So if people do things long enough, then they start to habituate to that, and then they have these relative imbalances, right? I mean, we're always in balance because we're right or left-handed, but they get more extreme in relationship to that. So one of the things that we have to make sure we're paying attention to is that process, and our goal is to change those patterns and habits, so that when they see the movement, they have a better understanding of it. And that's why we need to also show it, not just talk it and not just touch. It's a little bit of everything. And that's really part of the whole learning process. And Joe understood it, because you see, he showed it, right? We know there's voice of him teaching it. So we know he, very limited English, and didn't use a lot of big words and a lot of anatomy. It was up, down, in, out. Basic, simple cues, and he did a lot of hands-on as well. Okay, so that's really contrology, because that's how the nervous system learns, and you have to find what works best for each individual, and they're never just one or the other. And if you teach the way you learn, you will find students that will come to you because they will stay, because there's a connection. But if you're losing clients and you're not getting, people come and they don't stay as much, and Joe had this issue too, and so did Corolla, and it's not, no studio ever had people that just came and they all stayed. People came, they liked it, they didn't like it, they didn't like the personality, there are many different reasons. It still happens today. So that's part of it. So one of the things to always remember is that that's what we're trying to do, is that educational aspect, and resetting the habituation and the pattern, so that when they see it, they can start to do it, and they do it better as they progress. And that's feedback, and it's not always just from the teacher, it's from the apparatus, and I've talked about that with foam and different things like that before as well. Okay? So it doesn't start in the feet. As a matter of fact, what I see quite often is it's really in the hips, because that's where a lot of that rotation happens, in the hips, in relationship to the stability and mobility in the powerhouses. And, that's where you start to compensate. And then it'll go down to the foot. And now sometimes it's also in the foot, because people have injured their foot or had a problem with their foot. They lose a fat pad, different things. So it could be the foot. Quite often it's the hip. But it all starts where? In the powerhouse. And even before the powerhouse, it has to start in the brain. Okay? So there you go. All right. So that's it for today. I'm going to, again, pick up every Friday. We'll be here. So if you have a question, please DM me. I will add it to the list, and if there's anything that you want to join in, DM me as well, and we'll see if we can make that work. And then lastly, I'm teaching classes. I have every Tuesday. I have a class at 12:30, which is Balanceology. It's not Pilates. It's balance work. I work on the eyes and the vestibular system, inner ear, and the proprioceptive system, and I challenge all that. It's similar to Pilates, but it takes it steps further. And then at 1:00, I teach the arm springs, leg springs, the resistor poster. So if you want to join in, you can. You don't need a resistor. You can have a Cadillac, a wall unit, one of those things. Anything that has where you can adjust arm springs and leg springs. And join in. And if you want to follow along, you can go to the Pilates Source Etsy store and purchase the two posters, the Resistor 1 and Resistor 2 posters, and you'll have the pictures, and that's pretty much what I follow. Joe had some other arm spring, leg springs in the archive, so I do add some of those as well. So if you'd like to join in. Okay? All right, everybody, thanks for joining. And again, if this, if you know people who would like to also watch this, they can watch it on the Pilates Source YouTube channel. I will post it within usually a day or two, sometimes right after. Depends. I had some time today, so I think I'm going to try to post it right after. But it can take up to a day or so. But if you want to watch it, join in and watch it on the Pilates Source YouTube channel as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you later.